Hello, everybody, and welcome into another edition of our Eye on the Tigers podcast here at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I'm Ben Frederickson, and alongside Dave Matter, who's joining us from the Columbia Bureau. And man, I didn't know that it would be possible early on in the season, but here it is. We are on the cusp of December, and there's still a Missouri football season to talk about. The Tigers' 6-game winning streak secured the first bowl appearance in a couple years, and Dave Matter right now is sitting in front of what I imagine to be like a beautiful mind type dry erase board with equations and things everywhere, trying to figure out where Missouri will be headed for its bowl game. Dave, let's start there. Just right now, where things sit, I know the bowl game will not be announced until the first week of December here. But what are you thinking?
Well, it's a little tough to figure out right now, only because this situation is different than in past bowl situations for Missouri. They're in the SEC pool of 6, so there's 6 bowls we know where Missouri could play. Unlike other years when Missouri was in the Big 12 or even the first few years in the SEC, the league decides who plays in these 6 bowls. They basically play matchmaker. They get every team's preference for which bowl they play in. Then they get each of those bowls' preference for what SEC team they get. And then they sit down with some kind of algorithm or something and try to make everybody as happy as possible with when it comes to proximity, when it comes to matchups, when it comes to ticket sales. So where Missouri wants to play may not be the same answer that the SEC gives them of where the SEC wants them to play. So it's a little different than just calling a bowl game and say, hey, what teams are you looking at? Because you call these bowls and they're like, well, we're looking at all of them, and it's really not up to us ultimately. The Liberty Bowl is right there. I think if the Liberty Bowl is on the table, now which they may not be, which is interesting, I think Missouri would want to play there in Memphis against a Big 12 team. The Liberty Bowl definitely has a lot of interest in Missouri because of the proximity, especially to St. Louis, not very far. But there may not be 6 teams for these 6 spots because there's so few SEC-eligible teams this year. So it depends on those New Year's Day playoff bowls. If 3 SEC teams get in there, which they probably will, Auburn, Alabama, and Georgia, that leaves only 5 teams for these 6 bowls. If that's the case, there is sort of an unwritten rule, as has been explained to me, that the Liberty Bowl is eliminated then, so you can scratch them off the list if there's not enough teams. So where does that leave Missouri? The Texas Bowl in Houston, possibly the Music City Bowl in Nashville, maybe out in Charlotte in the Belk Bowl, the Outback Bowl in Tampa, I think is kind of a long shot. And then there's one more that's escaping me right now.
The Tax Slayer
Bowl. Tax Slayer Bowl in Jacksonville. They've shown some interest in Missouri, just coming to a few of their games. So short answer is it's still kind of early to know.
I wonder about the Tax Slayer Bowl because I've covered that one before, and it's Florida location. Everybody likes a chance to go to Florida. But in terms of which might benefit Missouri, I think you're right. I think the Liberty Bowl is at the top of the list because fans will make that drive, and Memphis is a popular destination for a weekend. I also wonder about, you mentioned the Music City Bowl, that could help maybe with some Tennessee area kind of recruiting. But I wonder, for recruiting purposes, that the Texas Bowl might be the best choice.
Yeah, and that comes up a lot, and it always sounds good in theory that the recruiting is going to make an impact, but I've never really heard a recruit who picked Missouri who said, I
picked them because of the Texas Bowl.
They played a bowl in my backyard. Because does that work against you then if you lose the game? Do you lose recruits? And all these games are on national TV. It's not like the coaches are going to go out and recruit all the high schools the week that they're there. They're spending time with the players and their families for the most part. So I think the recruiting impact is minimal. There's so many bowl games now. It's not like these high school kids are, hey, we got to pay attention to the game that's downtown at our stadium, more so than, the one that's played 1,000 miles away that features more interesting teams. So I do think one interesting thing is Missouri, compared to all these other teams that are in the mix, they're coming in with more momentum. They're a really good story. They've got a very exciting offense. They've got Drew Lock. I think there's something there that these bowls can really sell when they want to, sell tickets to their local markets, as opposed to a place like, Kentucky that didn't really finish the year very strong. Other schools that have some changes on their coaching staffs. like a Mississippi State. I mean, they're going to be bringing a new coach. I don't know how plugged in or tuned into their bowl game they're really going to be. So Missouri's got a lot going for itself just as far as its appeal to some of these games.
And I think Nashville too. Nashville, anyone who has any sort of involvement in football there knows how well Missouri fans travel to Nashville for games against Vanderbilt.
Oh yeah.
So I think that would appeal. That would appeal to me if I'm on the Liberty Bowl. I would say give us Missouri because we know fans will make the trip to Memphis. And also if you're on the Music City Bowl, you're saying send the Tigers our way because we've seen how much they flood Vanderbilt Stadium for that game when they make the trip. So that would be another one that I think they would be very receptive to bringing a red-hot Missouri football team in for that. I have one request, and I don't care if it's the Liberty Bowl. I don't care if it's the Texas Bowl. I would like to see Missouri take on a Big 12 team.
Oh yeah. And if it's the Texas Bowl in Houston, it's a very good chance it could be the Longhorns. And as well as I do how often we will hear the famous line from Texas' former president about how Texas' bad years are still better than Missouri's best years. And, Texas was the school that caused a lot of the tension and a lot of the angst that eventually led Missouri to leave the Big 12. And not that any of those leaders are still there. They turned over their administration and their coaching staff as much as Missouri has in recent years. But there still will be some juicy storylines there in a Tom Herman, Barry Odom showdown. In
your opinion, what is the best, like the most renowned bowl the Tigers have a chance of getting into? Maybe a slim chance, but still a possibility where we sit as of today on Wednesday when we're recording this podcast.
Well, if you're talking about name recognition, I guess maybe the Outback Bowl because that's played a little bit later. It's in Tampa. Every time there's a Florida bowl game, you kind of think of that as being a little bit more impressive when it comes to like branding. But I don't know if you can really go wrong with any of these. And so much of it just comes down to the matchup. Missouri, when they played Northwestern in the Alamo Bowl, Alamo Bowl's a really good game, but Northwestern, that didn't really it wasn't as high on the radar maybe nationally as if they, as compared to maybe when they played. I thought the Oklahoma State matchup in the Cotton Bowl was really good. When they played Arkansas in the Cotton Bowl was really good. So I think a lot of times it just comes down to the matchup. What's most interesting? They played North Carolina one year in Shreveport, and nobody cared for that game.
I think that had more to do with Shreveport than anything. No offense, Shreveport.
Also they had an interim head coach. In North Carolina, there's just not much juice there in trying to build up that game. Probably the same for Navy when they played them in the Texas Bowl, and Missouri forgot to show up for that game. So I think the matchup is probably the most important.
To be fair, that Missouri team didn't have a lot of time. It's not like they had like 2 weeks of extra practice to prepare for an option offense.
Right.
So I don't. Yeah, gotta give them a break there. I'm being sarcastic, of course, to the listeners who didn't pick up on that. A New Year's Day game would be good. I mean, that's something you can. That's a big deal. So the Outback Bowl would be great. You also maybe if you're covering it, you could get one of those blooming onions. I think they make those pretty available to the press corps that's covering the Outback Bowl. So there might be some personal interest in going to that one. We kind of feel like we need to, as we wait to find out where Missouri is headed for sure, we almost need to like reintroduce Missouri football fans to what it's like to have a team that is preparing for a bowl game. Because now is this point where in the past, since 2014, Missouri fans have packed it in and worried about next year. Well, now this season is still ongoing, but you almost kind of have to have a foot in both camps. You're kind of looking forward, but also preparing for a bowl game. And something that comes along with this is when you have a coach who got his team to a bowl game, you oftentimes are dealing with, A, is he going to get hired somewhere else? B, is he going to get some sort of an extension? And usually you don't have guys who have winning records, especially at Missouri, who are getting canned. So I think we can take that off the table. Jim Sturks made it pretty clear Barry Odom's coming back. But you had the report recently that the Tigers are working on some sort of an extension for Coach Odom. Now I know there are fans who saw that and go, "What?" The way they started the season, and certainly the end was good, but it doesn't mean you just slap an extension on a guy. Well, it kind of does. Explain to people why it's right and why it's really the only way of doing business that the Tigers would be considering some sort of an extension for Coach Odom.
Right, and the first thing to keep in mind is the economics of college sports and coaching contracts they're crazy. They don't line up to what your job and what our listeners' jobs are on an everyday basis in real America is. So don't try to say, well, gosh, I'd love to, get an extension and get a raise after doing a crappy job for half of my year. That's just not how it works in college sports. He's got 3 years left on his current deal. Going into this season, he was the lowest paid head coach in the SEC. What's crazy about this league is going into next season, I think he's going to be tied for 5th or 6th in tenure because there's been so much turnover. And you can guarantee he's still going to be down at the bottom in salary. Maybe not at the bottom. It depends on how much of a raise he gets because of, the coaches that are still left in the league and then some of the new ones that are going to come in and get bigger salaries. But when you look around the country, I would venture to guess most coaches who are going to be in bowl games this year and ones who had a winning season and finished the year on pretty solid ground like Missouri, they've got at least 4 years on their deal. That's just how it works. These agents and these coaches, they sort of demand security, and maybe it's sort of a racket, but they convince their ADs, they convince the schools that, hey, if we want to recruit and we don't want to be recruited against, we have to at least give off the perception that I'm going to be here for the length of these kids' the careers. So I need to have at least 4 years on my deal. Again, does that mean Missouri stuck with Barry Odom for 4 or 5 years or whatever his contract is? No, they all have buyouts. I mean, there's ways to get out of every contract, especially in coaching. So they may, bump up his buyout a little bit, which right now is very, very modest compared to what we see from a lot of these coaches around the country that are getting fired. So it's not like that's not to say Missouri's locked into Barry Odom and they've decided that, okay, he's a coach for life now. No, this is just how these contracts work. And, if they start off 1-5 again next year and they're looking like they were this season midway through, we're going to be right having the same conversations we were this fall about, okay, maybe he's not the guy going forward. The fact that he got an extension doesn't really change that a whole lot.
Well, I would point out a couple of things. One is it's really tough to recruit when you don't have the length of a contract that says you'll be there through that recruit's entire college experience. So most college football players, they're going to spend 4 years playing college football. That's the kind of the standard, right? Not everybody goes pro. Not everybody transfers out. They're looking at a 4-year window. When a coach comes in and wants you to sign that letter of intent that says I'm going to stay with this school, then they want to be able to think the coach is going to be there for 4 years. And if he's got a 3-year deal or a 2-year deal, a logical question for that family is, well, why don't you have the security that says you'll be here through the end of my commitment to play for you? And that's something that is used a lot in negative recruiting, whether it's football or basketball. You'll have school X recruiting a player Missouri wants, and that school might say, hey, are you sure you want to go sign up to play for Barry Odom? His deal isn't even through the length of time you'll be there. Think about that. Our coach has a 6-year deal. He's not going anywhere. That's how much trust our school has in him. The worst thing you want to do is to go play for a coach who might not be there for your senior season, and then you spend your senior year adapting to a new system, and your NFL your NFL prospects are ruined because you had to play for a new coach. Or what if the new coach brings his own guy? I mean, there's all kinds of things that these coaches can bring up to kids who are considering where to play college. So if you're going to be recruiting at the highest level, you need to be able to say, look, I'm going to be here. My contract says I'm going to be here through the end of that. So to me, the extension is a no-brainer. You want him to have 4 years. I would be careful about jacking up the buyout. I would try to give him an extension and give him a raise, but don't jack up that buyout, because we are seeing schools across the country getting really punished by these lucrative buyouts that were probably afterthoughts in these contracts that then are coming to kick them in the tail when they decide it's time to move on. I'm interested in what you think of Barry's leverage here. Because, look, we all know Barry Odom is where he wants to be. I don't know that there's another job out there that would interest Barry Odom as opposed to winning big at the University of Missouri. Now, it's fair to question if he'll be able to do that, but I think in his heart of hearts he is where he wants to be. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Do you think there's another job in Barry Odom's mind that if he has more success, that Mizzou might have to make some sort of a contract or deal that could get him to stay?
Being an Oklahoma guy, the only jobs I ever think that would really, try to be tempting for him would be Oklahoma or Oklahoma State. And I don't even think Oklahoma State really is on the same level as Oklahoma, and it doesn't look like Lincoln Riley's going anywhere anytime soon. And again, I don't think Barry Odom has the cachet yet to even be, thought about for the Oklahoma job. Look, he's a Missouri guy. He's a Mizzou guy. He says it all the time himself. What was his speech? He said, "I'm the guy to lead this program to win." So He's really sort of attached himself to this job in a lot of different ways. He preaches, to recruits, the in-state recruits, about coming and playing for the state's only Division I school. He's so much pride and commitment to there. So in a way, if another job would ever come his way, or if he and his agent want to use another job as sort of leverage for negotiations, if I'm Jim Sterk, do you call his bluff and say, well, what's all this talk about, you being a Mizzou guy and you being the guy to turn this thing around? So it's all comes down to leverage and negotiations, and what you think you can sort of use in your argument when you're trying to get a raise. Realistically, is there a job out there that I think would seriously consider him right now, or that he would seriously consider? No, I don't think there is, and I don't know if there ever will be. But you never know. If this team starts being a contender annually in the SEC East and winning double-digit games, then someone might take some interest in him, because he'll never be among the highest-paid coaches in this league. And at the end of the day, coaches want to get paid. So I could see something down the road maybe developing, but he's got to win a lot of games, I think, before we can really talk about that.
Yeah, so reward him for the second half of the season to an extent. Maybe reward his staff members, keep those guys intact, and then. But I wouldn't go messing with the buyout unless you absolutely feel like you have a threat. I would be careful there. And we mentioned the staff, and I wanted to ask you about that, because I think Mizzou fans had a little chill go up their spine when they saw that report from AL.com that Josh Heupel has been, according to a source, expressed interest in the South Alabama head coaching job. Now, again, press the brakes here a little bit. This doesn't mean he's going. This doesn't mean anything. Everybody knows that Josh Heupel wants to be a head coach at some point, so it doesn't. It's not necessarily the most shocking news in the world that he would be keeping an eye on opportunities that are out there. Now, I don't think he would necessarily want to leave Mizzou for a job that pays him less than he makes as Missouri's offensive coordinator. But hey, sometimes guys are desperate to be a head coach and they want to take their shot. In my opinion, it's very important that Missouri does not let Josh Heupel leave now. I realize that at some point you're going to maybe lose Josh Heupel to go try his hand at being a head coach somewhere, and if that's what he wants to do, then who can knock him for wanting to take that shot? But with what this offense has coming back, with how this offense kind of found its groove finally in the second half of the season, with Drew Lock trying to think about whether or not he wants to come back or go to the NFL, it's very important that Josh Heupel is around for 2018, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. And a couple things, like if this came up back the day after Missouri lost to Purdue, Missouri fans that are worried now, they would have gladly paid for his travel expenses
right.
out of Columbia. So
right.
It's such a fickle thing. And when these rumors and reports do come up, I mean, this is a reflection of having a good team and a good coach. So it's something in big picture. You step back, you say this is a positive sign. This means that somebody's noticed the job that Missouri's done and noticed the job that Barry Odom did in hiring this guy. I mean, not too long ago, Josh Heupel was the heir apparent to Bob Stoops at Oklahoma. Most people considered him, the guy in waiting without actually having that in his contract with the Sooners. We know that didn't work out, obviously, and now he's at Missouri kind of reviving his career. So would it be a loss if he goes on to a head coaching job at a mid-major conference? Yeah, it would be a loss, but I think Barry probably knows enough people in the business to where he could go out and be able to hire someone, and that's why I think some of this leveraging, some of this negotiation talk with that's going down right now will be about, like you mentioned, getting some more money for his assistant coaches, because I think he really values this staff, especially in the offensive side. That side has total autonomy. Barry Odom does not mess with the offense. If Heupel would leave, and that's a big if at this point, I think you'd have to look outside for a guy that can run his own ship on that side of the ball. I don't know if there's anybody on that staff that can do that right now. And either way, you would have to hire somebody to coach quarterbacks, because that's Heupel's specialty. So it really be interesting to see how this happens down the road. I mean, nobody should be surprised if he gets head coaching interest either this season or next, when you have an offense that's been this good, people notice that.
I'm not sure if I'm Heupel, if I don't think I have one of the best offensive coordinator jobs in the country right now. I mean, you're making good money, $700,000, probably going to get a bump on that. You have complete, as you said, autonomy. Your head coach basically just wants you to coach your offense, and the smoother it runs, the better. And he's not going to come over there and tell you what to do. And you've got a quarterback coming back who just set the, hopefully coming back for him, who just set the SEC record for touchdown passes thrown, and all of his pass catchers except Jamon Moore are going to be back. His offensive line is going to be back. He's going to have Demaria Crockett and Larry Roundtree in the backfield. I'm thinking, if I'm Josh Heupel, my statement to make my case that someone has to come poach me away as a head coach, it's in 2018.
Yeah, I would think so. The one thing that could change this is if Heupel should get a strong indication that Locke is thinking about leaving.
Yes.
Does that change his mind? And here's the other thing: if Drew gets a pretty good sense that Josh is looking to leave
Correct.
and be a coach somewhere else, does that change his decision? Because Drew Locke doesn't. He really likes Josh Heupel. Really loves playing for him. I don't know if he wants to go into his senior year playing for a third different quarterbacks coach, third different offensive coordinator. This is a kid that's logged a lot of minutes in college football. I think the novelty with a kid like this, just not saying this is how Drew's looking at it, but for a lot of kids, they're ready to move on after they've played as many games as he has. And if you throw in a new coaching staff and the uncertainty of that, at least on that side of the ball, could that nudge him out the door a little bit more? I don't know. We're really being speculative here, but I think knowing Heupel's coming back is definitely a plus to keep Drew Locke on campus for another season.
These two need to go out to lunch at Booch's or Flat Branch or wherever and just have a gentleman's agreement. Are you in? Are we in? And then that would make Missouri fans feel a lot better. And in my opinion, I think they would both help themselves greatly by both being back next year. And then Drew Locke could maybe be one of the top quarterbacks talked about in the next draft. And Heupel could have, if things line up, he could have a pretty impressive offensive resume for whoever he wanted to send it to. So we can stop the speculation on Odom and Heupel there. But I guess, just to wrap this up in terms of what happens during kind of this bowl limbo as a team waits, do you think there are any other coaches on Barry's staff that are at risk of being poached?
I think Glenn Ellerbe, the offensive line coach, is a guy who's gaining a little bit more national notoriety for what he's done with this offensive line, and deservedly so. And that's not to say he's looking to leave. I think he likes coaching at Missouri by all accounts. I think he really likes the players. But there's a lot of new staff popping up in this conference alone, guys who are going to be aware of what Missouri's offensive line has done the last 2 years. And frankly, these other schools have more money. They just have more resources. So it wouldn't shock me at all if a new staff that comes together, with Tennessee or Florida or wherever, takes a look at Glenn Ellerbe. And we'll see if Missouri can match anything that might come his way. On the defensive side of things, not so much offensively other than Ellerbe. I don't know if there's a lot of guys that are looking to leave. I mean, Andy Hill is pretty entrenched at Missouri at this point. Probably say the same for Cornell Ford, but you never know. I mean, these people, these coaches, they know that they're in a year-to-year contract situation for the most part, and that's kind of the deal you buy into when you get into college coaching. And if one school is offering you a lot more money than what you're making right now, I think you're always going to listen. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if some of these coaches get some other offers that they at least want to consider.
Yeah, stay tuned. I didn't think we'd be here talking about coaches maybe being attractive to other programs, and also talking about trying to pinpoint which bowl game the Tigers were going to earlier this month. So that has been quite the season for the Tigers. They got to the cusp of 8 wins. They could get 8 in a bowl game victory, and you're thinking, man, if you would have told us that at the beginning of the season, a lot of people would have said that's a great, outstanding year. But the way it got there was certainly interesting. It was a story of a team that basically divided its season into a half, but it ended on a high note, and that's the way you want to do it. If you're going to pick one, you pick the second half. We'll kind of flip to the first half of a different sport, Mizzou men's basketball. You were at the Advocare Invitational. You saw the Tigers make it to the championship round of that, and we had a really good lead against West Virginia, 16 points before watching it slip through their fingers. That's a tough loss basically West Virginia clamped down on the press and was able to kind of get Missouri sped up, and their lack of a true ball handler kind of hurt them there. What were your takeaways from the tournament as a whole, and what kind of impression did you come back to Columbia with about this team as it prepares to go on the road again, back to Florida to play UCF?
Yeah, other than the meltdown they had there in those final 7 minutes against a really good team, I thought Missouri came out really focused. They played with great energy, and on defense, it looked as good as a defensive effort I've seen over a few game stretches from Missouri since probably going back to the Mike Anderson years. I mean, they really got after it, and they gave West Virginia a lot of trouble defensively too. Most of their points came from the free throw line, and that's just young guys still learning how to play defense without fouling. But West Virginia shot in the 30s in that game, so it was. I was impressed with Konzo what he got out of those guys on that end, and got a few other guys out of some scoring slumps. Cassius Robertson was really dialed in. Jordan Barnett finding different ways to score. Jonte Porter continues to impress and just plays a game that is so much more advanced than I would have expected from him this year. I think the point guard position is really the one that's under the spotlight right now. Konzo basically made Jordan Geist his floor general. I mean, he didn't start, but he played the bulk of the minutes, and up until those turnovers there at the end of the West Virginia game, he was really, really good. And his scoring is almost like a bonus. It's like the old Yadier Molina line about how if he can hit 250 and hit a couple home runs, it's great. It's just an added bonus because he's out there for his defense, and that's kind of what they get with Geist. And now all of a sudden he's shooting like 42% from three. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes on the offensive end until till West Virginia really unleashed their press on him. But that's a position, competition, or however we want to call it, to really watch, because Blake Harris was starting those games and he definitely was not finishing them. And that's a really interesting development right now.
Yeah, I think the point guard situation is probably the biggest question hovering over this team, the biggest non-Michael Porter Jr. question. We can get to that in a bit. But I think ideally this team has Blake Harris as its starting point guard. It has Cassius Robertson playing off the ball, and it has Geist being an energy guy, the glue guy, the JT Tiller type that really does all the dirty work and energizes the team through doing it, and then some really talented bigs. That's a good team, and how they get to that, I'm not sure. But it seems like Konzo is kind of trying to put Blake Harris through the paces here. He's trying to tell him, look, you're going to have to earn this, and you have all the talent in the world, and I think he's made it pretty clear he would like Blake Harris to seize this job, but he's also made it clear he's not just going to hand it to him on a silver platter either.
Right. Well, he didn't like his body language on the sideline on the bench during the St. John's game when Missouri was making a big comeback. Blake wasn't as happy or energetic as his teammates were, to say the least. And that's the kind of stuff, Konzo, he notices that stuff, and his staff definitely notices that. And you definitely did notice in the second half of the West Virginia game when Missouri was playing well, Blake Harris was up and being the loudest cheerleader out there.
He had pom-poms.
So I think the message was delivered for sure there. And, just because he's not playing a lot of minutes, that doesn't mean they've given up on him or anything like that. It doesn't mean that this is some big negative, rift at all. He's trying to teach him a lesson. He's trying to get his attention, and he also believes that the point guard position, it's the transition from high school to college, is really difficult. So he's going to have a short leash on him. He had a really bad pass to Jeremiah Tillman's ankles in that in the West Virginia game, and he pulled him right after that. He lost his man a few times on defense. He pulled him right after that. He's not going to give him as long of a leash as a guy that is a little bit more seasoned, that might play with a little bit more poise on both ends than a freshman out there who makes some freshman mistakes sometimes.
Yeah, I think any team that watches that game is going to press Missouri early and often. I don't know why West Virginia waited as long as it did, but if I watch that film, I'm going to press this team and make them prove that they can come up with a way to inbounds the ball and get it across half court before I call the dogs off, because that was one of those things you saw it coming from a mile away. I mean, you knew going into the game. We talked about it. I think on a previous podcast that West Virginia had these experienced old, nasty guards, and they were going to play tough. And when you put those guys against a backcourt of Missouri that's a little inexperienced, a little green, then that had a recipe for disaster. And Missouri figured out a way around it for most of the game, and then West Virginia clamped the press down, and it kind of just snowballed. So that's a teaching moment for this team. That's a game that you look back later in the season and say, what did we learn from it? Because there's a chance that you could meet that team or a team like it in a very important game down the line. So how they respond to it is going to be a big one. I thought Jonte was kind of I thought this was a little bit of a coming out party for him down there in Orlando. I mean, I know Fran Fraschilla was just going nuts about all the ways he can impact a game, but I'm continually impressed by how he plays, not only just what he can do in terms of his passing ability and his rebounding and his shot making, but also just kind of his demeanor. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a freshman have make plays like he does and then just react as if he simply tied his shoe or something. I mean, he's a mature type player out there.
There was one moment where he banked in a three against St. John's where he actually smiled and kind of laughed at the bench when they were all, goofing on him a little bit. And it was kind of nice to see, like, oh, that's right, he is 18 years old. He's not, this 30-year-old grizzled veteran out there. He can have some fun. He's also a guy, when he gets the ball inside, you're sitting there courtside and you're like, why doesn't he dunk more often? It seems like he's a little cautious and a little too cute with the ball sometimes, even though he's the biggest player on the floor most of the time. So that's the amazing thing is he's still very raw. He's still learning the game. He's still learning what a foul is in college basketball. I think we all are, but he is especially. And at the same time, he's still producing. He's pulling down a bunch of rebounds. He's been a really effective three-point shooter. He's a great passer, and he's blocking like 4 or 5 shots a game in some of these games. So he's a real weapon. I was completely wrong on him. I thought it was going to take him, half the year or maybe the full season to really get up to speed at this level. But he plays like a future lottery pick. One of these 6'11" guys with this huge wingspan that plays the game like a small forward or like a shooting guard. So it's pretty cool to see those talents come out already, just 7 games into his career. And don't forget, he didn't really practice with the team this summer because he was at that point he was still going to be a high school senior, and he hadn't reclassified until late in the summer.
Yeah, I talked to Earl Austin Jr., who's as in tune as in the preps basketball scene here in St. Louis as anybody had seen Jonte play as a high schooler. He's obviously on the call for the SLU Billikens broadcast. I saw him last night at the SLU game, and he was talking about how Jonte kind of has some Tim Duncan-esque tendencies. Yeah. Now he wasn't saying, look, this guy's gonna be Tim Duncan, but he's saying the way that he can do the little things, the passing, the rebounding, but also the touch on the shooting, and also just kind of the understanding of the game. He has a cerebralness to him that you don't see a lot of times in kids that young, and a kid who really should be a high school senior. So I think it's going to be very fun to watch him develop, and I think the Tigers have to be impressed with how quickly he's come along. He's only going to get better too. That's the scary thing.
And really, the irony of Jonte was the reason he would stay in high school, and this was explained to me by his dad, and he talked about too, is so that he could enjoy a season outside of Michael's shadow. Well, he is,
yeah,
but in college,
right.
It's not the way anybody really expected it to be. So this is so off script from what we expected back in the summer, and even leading up to tip off back on November 10th. So it's very interesting to see how it's all kind of unfolded here.
Yeah, you mentioned Michael's shadow, and that's certainly something this team is I don't know, shadow feels like a negative word, but you don't have the number one player in the country associated with your team, and have it not be something that continues to I guess be a question, especially when he says, hey, I'm going to put this Instagram post on my account that says that the timetable on my recovery might have been off. What did you make? You did some reporting on this. You were able to have a conversation with Michael. Obviously, anytime this guy sends a tweet or posts on Instagram, then people are going to lose their minds when it's related to a potential comeback. What did you make of this, and what did your reporting lead you to believe about that post, which basically said, look, 4 to 6 months, 3 to 4 months was not accurate.
Well, he went stronger than that. He said whoever said that is a liar, and he used the word liar. That's a really strong word. he's a kid. We have to remember that they say and do silly things on social media, but he also has, a billion followers who are paying attention to every word that he tweets or posts on social media. He did delete that quickly thereafter, but it's too late. I mean, everybody took their screenshots already, myself included, while having an early dinner before the championship game on Sunday night. I did reach out to him. He wrote me back right away and said, "Hey, all I was saying was I'm really excited about my rehab. My recovery is going great." He didn't mean anything negative the way he said it, but he did. I mean, he used the word liar, and that information, the 3 to 4 months, Missouri, they just didn't make that up. That came from his parents, and his parents got it from the doctor. So Missouri, they know how delicate this situation is. It's very complicated. That's how one administrator described it to me recently. It's very complicated. You've got so many layers to his role on the team, his future, his status. You've got his dad on the staff. You've got his brother on the team. You've got his sisters over on the women's team. His aunt is the women's team's coach. So this is a very unconventional situation. And in a way, this is what Gonzo signed up for. It's probably more drama, more of a sideshow than he could have anticipated. You know Gonzo better than anybody that covers his team. He wants to focus on his team, what's on the court, what he can fix in practice, and prepare for the games and not deal with this other stuff. But this other stuff is going to be there for the rest of the season. I mean, until they make some kind of declarative statement, he's coming back on this game or he's not coming back at all, this is going to be out there for the rest of the winter and into the spring.
I guess the question that I think, and it's not like it's been for lack of attempt of asking, but we haven't had a chance to talk with Michael in an interview setting since the surgery. The question that needs to be answered, I think, is, hey, Michael, you had the surgery. You feel good about your recovery. Obviously, that's going to be something that comes and goes as the recovery process and rehab goes. But if you feel good and you get clearance, do you want to try to come back and play this season? To my knowledge, that question hasn't been answered.
Right.
So as long as that's out there, people are going to wonder.
Right. As a player who grew up in the sport and knows that this is his life, I'm sure the answer will be yes, I want to play. But is he ultimately making that decision? Obviously, there was some input into the decision to not go with the treatment plan prescribed by Missouri's medical staff and go to this renowned spinal surgeon down in Dallas. So they didn't just wake up one morning and say, let's go to Texas and have this done. So obviously, they got some input there. The same voices that are giving that input, will they also advise him not to play any more college basketball and risk further injury? We don't know any of those answers. Like you said, there's a lot of unanswered questions here, and that's kind of par for the course with a situation like this when you're talking about a college athlete, a high-profile one that I don't know when we'll talk to him again. It could be on draft night, who knows? But it's a really, really interesting situation, and like I said, it's probably the last thing Gonzo wants to deal with because he's all about the team, all about his job. His livelihood is getting this program and getting his team to win some games. And without the distraction, whatever you want to call it, of the Porter saga.
Yeah. So until then, just stay tuned to Michael's Instagram account, and we'll do weekly updates here on the podcast. No, that's it's fascinating, man. It's interesting, and I think. I don't know when we can expect more information or if we can at all, so that adds to the intrigue. So, all right, man. Well, I think we're over time here. Executive producer Gary Harrelson is telling me to wrap it up, so we'll cut it off. And by the time we talk to you guys next, we will know which bowl game Missouri will be headed to, and we'll be able to do a preview of that, get you all caught up on the opponent, and we'll also have some more basketball games to talk about as well. For Dave Matter, I'm Ben Frederickson. We will catch you guys next time. Just a quick reminder before we go that you can find this podcast and all of our other podcasts here at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It's very easy. Just go to stltoday.com/podcast. You can subscribe there. You can leave a review if you'll do us a favor and go ahead and become a subscriber. It helps us out a ton. You can also download iTunes, Google Play Music, whatever you use. And I just talked to Gary. He's going to also put a link up on YouTube as well. So just another avenue for you to be able to find the podcast. So thanks, Gary, for all his help. Thanks, Dave. We will talk to you all next time here on the Eye of the Tigers podcast at St. Louis Post-Dispatch.